is no redress in the act of killing your own citizens.
Because they keep doubling down.
They knew this was a plan.
90% of it, though, is about what you can actually do.
This shot will give you life, and if you don't, it gives you death. And this is the point. People who don't have God in their lives are afraid to die. And so, of course, they're going to run.
And even stranger, they're also afraid to live.
Good morning, Max Choice and Cloud Hub family. How are you today, Todd?
Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know where people are at this moment in time, so we'll just cover the whole gamut. Happy to be here, Cordelia. Today's a special day. This is a special episode. We got Mel K with us today talking about her new book. And by the way, we're going to skip the monologue because she effectively is going to do the monologue for us with the contents of her book and walk us through it. So there's a lot to be talked about. We're going to forego about 15 minutes of my nonsense, get straight to her. And I'm excited to have her here today. Too long in the making. So thanks for putting this together, Cordelia.
Of course, this is going to be an excellent show, and of course, we're going to have an excellent guest. But I don't want to keep anybody waiting too long, so I'll be in the background.
Fabulous. Bring her in, if you wouldn't mind, Mel K. You're a famous person, and I'm so excited that you are. And no, I'm serious. And what I love about this is you've been out there putting yourself out there for a lot of years. I've been watching for many years, predating COVID and all that stuff. But you were tuned into the parallel government, the hidden hand, the owners, as I call them, for eons. You've got a lot of history and perspective. But I would like to know, because I don't know the whole story, Mel. How did you learn all this stuff? What was the inspiration? Give people a little bit of background about yourself, and then we'll get into your book.
Okay. Well, I grew up in, my dad's a true diehard patriot. He loves America. I got to grow up in a house where I felt like Rush Limbaugh was on all the time when I was a little kid. And my dad took us, a big part of growing up in my family was learning history and going to historical places. And it was very important to my parents that we visited museums, and we really went all over the world kind of learning about, why America exists, why this country is different. My dad, even after he retired from his first life, he became a Coast Guard auxiliary for the last, he's been 30 years. He's 89, 88.
Wow.
And And my mom was a teacher. And so I just really always loved American history. And my dad always put up the flag for every event outside. I lived in a town where it was a patriotic town. We'd have, Memorial Day and 4th of July parades, all that. So I loved all things Americana. I also grew up outside of Philadelphia. So growing up, it was like every school trip was to the Liberty Bell or to Ben Franklin Institute. I grew up I loved history, and then I ended up going to NYU for journalism and then switched into film. And that's kind of when everything took a turn, because I specialized and then worked for 22 years in LA in something kind of unique, which is historical drama, from essentially taking true history and fictionalizing it to tell kind of about different periods. And the one that kind of helped me the most and inspired me the most was the life of Hannah Arendt. She wrote Eichmann in Jerusalem, and which was the only Nazi trial in Israel. She also wrote Origins of Totalitarianism and a whole bunch of amazing books. And I wrote a screenplay about her when I was still in film school. And but that started the journey of really not being okay with history, but wanting to know why things happened the way they were and what triggered certain events in our, decades-long journey here in the United States of America to kind of shift our original founding documents to something else, which is where we are completely now. So that takes me to my current book, which is really looking at the origins of how the United States, I think, lost its sovereignty and its way, and hopefully how we can get it back.
Boy, it did. And before we get into the meat of all of that, what you described growing up, going to the Liberty Bell and hearing about these things, going to museums, all of which I think you said, true history.
Yeah.
How much of that is true anyway? How did you parse, what is real and what isn't real, and when did it all change? Because, everything in our society, Hollywood, governance itself, it's a show, Mel.
Yes. Yes.
And we are all convinced from the time we go into schools, little teeny kids, until the time we come out of whatever education we have, it's literally indoctrination to make us all believe the same thing, when in fact it is always told from the perspective of either the victor in whatever battle or those who have the power to give us the information, and which was in fact a monopoly. How did you overcome that veil of secrecy to actually start parsing out what was it that did it for you to go, no, this is not true?
Well, I think it was first my training as a screenwriter or playwright. When you do that, it's not good enough to just know what's going on. You kind of want to know, what were the headlines at the time? Who was in power? Who were the popular icons? Who was leading the news? And that really journey started with me with my script about Eichmann in Jerusalem, which connected later to COVID, because I
Yeah.
knew to write that, I had to really dig into the 20s and 30s in Germany, because I saw a lot of similarities between typhus and the concentration camp being quarantine camps. I was obviously
Yeah.
down in New York, as you know, and then with the papers and all of that, and really, I had just accidentally fallen in love with this woman's writing that wrote Origins of Totalitarianism. So, and then wrote a script about her. So when you really see that, then you start to see the parallels, the same names coming up over decades, the same, MO of historical things happening. And then the same people investigating the history are the ones that perpetrated the crime,
Yes.
with JFK. So this particular project goes back to that kind of thinking. And I'll tell you how it happened. I was on tour, for 3.5 years with Reawaken and with some other
Yeah.
groups. And my speeches were always about the global public-private partnership and international banking cartel. But the really drove me to get it all into a book was I started every speech with JFK's 1961 speech at the Waldorf Astoria to the press, where he says, the press is waiting for me to say that there's a clear and present danger. And he goes on to say, the danger has never been more clear. And it has never been a time where it's more present than right now. And he goes on to list a bunch of things, including the title of my book, Infiltration Instead of Invasion, Subversion Instead of Elections, Guerrillas by Night Instead of Armies by Day. And he ends it with, there's a tightly knit, global, essentially, group that puts together politics, money, law, military, and all of this to essentially to run the world from above.
Yeah.
And everyone would always say that that speech was about communism. And I did not think that ever. Even when I was reading it, I thought he was telling us that something, and remember, this is 1961, something inside America was terribly wrong and that we were in serious danger and that we were being infiltrated instead of invaded. And I thought,
That's
what
right.
was going on that made him give that speech with such urgency to the country and to it was to the press at that time. And so I reject the idea, and I reject it now completely, that he was talking about communism. What I believe he was talking about was what we're still living under, which is in 1953, two Wall Street lawyers walked into the most, I would say, the highest level positions in the American government that are not elected, the Secretary of State and the head of the CIA. This is the Dulles brothers in
Yeah.
1953. And our country from that day forward ceased to be a sovereign nation. We became I believe the State Department, CIA, and many people, and this came out of Nazi Germany, that we became a tentacle of a global governance system, that the international banks and international organizations and a lot of people that in our nation were participating in building a supranational architecture created, that essentially divvied the world up, with the United States taxpayer being the one funding everything.
Yeah,
So I mean, like,
it's true.
the war on communism, which of course is a tactic, not an enemy. So we paid for all that. Then the American taxpayers paid for the entire war on terror. Again, a tactic with no defined enemy, which ended up being turned on us. And I also firmly believe in the 90s, when Bill Clinton and Al Gore kicked off the climate change, global warming nonsense, that the American taxpayers paid trillions of dollars to date to fund the entire operation, which was really a consolidation of natural resources into the same hands as the consolidation of money, power, and military has been given since the Dulles brothers turned our country into a cash cow for the international banking cartel.
Boy, is that all true. If you look at that from 1955, what about those people that trace it really back to 2 years effectively after our independence, the Organic Act, and the fact that, from the revolution, the debt holder, those whom we actually had to repay for the cost of the revolution, was the crown. So I mean, for me, I look back at it as this way, that once power is held by anybody, whether that's a monarchy or a dictator, is almost irrelevant. They're not letting go of that power for free. So here we had the United Kingdom back in those days, England. The sun never set on the British Empire. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, we have all of these former colonies turned into what they call Commonwealth countries. In reality, that was a head fake, including, I think, as it relates to our nation itself. So how do you juxtapose that British influence? Are they related, the MI6s of this world? Is that who was driving the Dulles brothers and people like that? Or does it go back even further?
Well, I think it goes back a little further. I mean, I don't believe that the British ever even considered that the United States gained its independence in the Revolutionary War. I think that they realized it wasn't worth fighting anymore, and that they would go home and infiltrate us through the banks. And don't forget, the British and the French essentially still ran the South. A lot of what people don't know about slavery and the beneficiaries of slavery was essentially that they were sending cotton and things back to Europe in the South. And it was very important that Wilson was a traitor, I believe, completely aligned with the crown, many others before him. But I just believe that the first overt infiltration, I mean really just betrayal of the American people, the founders, and particularly I always look at George Washington's farewell address as the best case scenario for America, was to follow that. And but by 1912, 1913, with the Federal Reserve and then all of that, Wilson sold our country out. We already had subversive groups like the Rockefeller, Ford, and Carnegie Institutes and foundations, which they've been trying to investigate for decades. And then also, and obviously the same families that pushed the Federal Reserve. And then we do have to look at history very differently now, because I believe that the model of war for profit was already known by the end of the Civil War, certainly by then, but I think it was already known by the end of the Revolutionary War, and that they took that and ran with it after they got the power of the Federal Reserve to slowly but surely try to create this one world elite class of, as Rockefeller, one of the architects, said, it's certainly smarter for a wealthy intellectual class and international bankers to run the world than auto-determination of nations and peoples. Well, I believe that the impetus for World War I looks to me like what we would now call a false flag, and everything from there on was about consolidating power for, I believe, at the very top, the Bank of International Settlements, which was created after World War I under the guise of reparations by us, America, but really by Wall Street, and in Bern, Switzerland, in Basel, Switzerland. But during that time of after World War I, so I think the model they figured out long ago was that the money and power are consolidated upwards in the reconstruction after war. So a
Right.
lot of people look at war and they think, that's where all the money laundering happened. No, no, no. It's after the war, because if you look at what happened after World War One, they put together the Bank of International Settlements. Alan Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles end up spending most of World War II, certainly the last several years, in Switzerland, where the Bank of International Settlements is set up. And it's supposed to be for reparations. But really what's going on there is that they're rebuilding the industry and industrial capacity that allowed the First World War to be fought in Germany. And what's so scary is we were all told that Switzerland was neutral. The problem is that it was not neutral. What it was regardless of the war. This is what I believe. Regardless of the war and everyone dying and all of our ancestors and grandparents and great grandparents and 60 million people were affected by the terror and horror that was World War II. But what really was going on was that the Bank of International Settlements was not looking at allies or access or anything. They were running business as usual on the global scale.
Yes.
And this is with multinational corporations. This is with banking. This is with the money stolen from those 60 million people and their banks, all being transferred essentially to the Bank of International Settlements on all sides. So the Bank of International Settlements was run by a Wall Street lawyer named McKittrick. Two Wall Street lawyers, the Dulles brothers, are there helping with because they were at Sullivan and Cromwell, with the creation of a supranational international monetary system connected to the military industrial complex and NGOs to function above nations no matter what happened. Yes. Their whole goal was continuity of international finance, which was theirs, out of this Bank of International Settlements, which still exists to today.
Oh, yes.
And the other part is remember, before the end of World War II, before D-Day, they had Bretton Woods in New Hampshire to plan the aftermath of the war. And they weren't planning the aftermath of the war. They were planning the aftermath of the Reconstruction and the financial system that would control it. Well, when you look at all these pieces, and then in my book, I expose, and it's still to this day, not only, and the Dulles brothers, I bring them up because I think they were the architects, particularly John Foster Dulles, who goes on to be the Secretary of State. And I think when he went in, the State Department ceased to work for the United States of America. It worked now for this architecture supranational that he was involved in. But we have to remember, during that post-World War II, World War I time, now we remember back to everyone that was involved in the Federal Reserve. Well, now after World War I, we have multinational corporations that have one foot in Germany and one foot in America that are the biggest corporations in the world. And one of them is IG Farben. And IG Farben had a long-standing relationship with Rockefeller's Standard Oil of New Jersey. And they worked together and had multilateral contracts and sharing of patents. And it wasn't just them. It was multiple banks. Schrader's Bank was one of the main ones. We all know that somehow, Prescott Bush was doing banking with the Nazis. He got caught, and somehow his son ends up being promoted. This is what I'm talking about this thing. But what else was going on in Bern, Switzerland at the time under Alan Dulles, who I believe is truly the architect of how our country got stolen? I believe that they were creating an international intelligence agency that was never about protecting nations. So I believe at this point, the CIA, remember, this is all during 44 and 54. The CIA, GCHQ, MI6, but also the Five Eyes nations go into sharing of intelligence too. And, soon later, Israel comes into the mix, which I believe also to be somewhat of an intelligence operation. But what they created, I think, John Foster Dulles created the global public-private partnership of banks and multinational corporations running above nations. And his brother came in and created the protection racket for that. So my book is about when America got sold to the highest bidders, essentially, and the American people became funders for things we never even knew or understood. And that's where I feel like we still are, because as I was about to say, in 1945, these guys are very smart, but remember, they're all Wall Street lawyers, is what everyone has to remember. This matters because they manipulated the real Constitution and laws so that they were purposely above the government, above the president.
Yeah,
they
that's
set
right.
it up that way. And the sad part is both Eisenhower and Truman, who signed the horrible 1944 and 1947 acts that created the CIA and the NSC and the original DNI, which was a different kind of intelligence. He said, Truman, essentially on his deathbed, if he ever knew what the CIA would become, how sinister, and an American Gestapo, he never would have done it. And it was supposed to be intelligence gathering. Well, we all know Eisenhower also said something similar about the banks and the military and industrial complex. And then comes along JFK and lays it out, and then they murder him. And I feel like anyone since has had a regime change operation. I believe that this group, and I would say in America, it's the State Department since the Dulles brothers moved in 1953. The CIA protects them, but the CIA is, I think, a global intelligence organization, and has always been, and has never been about protecting America. I think it's been about protecting that continuity of the international banking cartel, international military, which is obviously NATO, international global public-private partners. And then in 1945, the Dulles brothers suggest and gain International Organization Immunity Act of 1945. This was their idea.
I was going to ask.
What that act does is, and Truman's responsible, but at the end, he knew he was played. What that act does is, to this day, you won't even believe this, the Bank of International Settlements has the most immunity and protection from anything on planet Earth that you can imagine. It has zero, it's inviolable, which means not only does it sit in Basel, Switzerland, and run the entire international banking operation, but not even Switzerland can enter their premises without permission. You cannot audit them. You cannot take legal action. You cannot walk into their headquarters. They don't keep notes. Everything is opaque. It's completely black hole. And this is the craziest part. Not only did the Bank of International Settlements get this complete and total, essentially, immunity from oversight, but so did 63 banks it's connected to, including ours. So when people don't understand, and then remember, after World War I, what did they want? They wanted the League of Nations and to keep the Bank of International Settlements. Well, after World War II, they're already they've already gone to Bretton Woods. They have before D-Day, they've already come up with the IMF and the World Bank, which are both under the International Organization Immune Act of 1945. Still to this day, even on American soil, the United States has zero jurisdiction over either of them. And then beyond that, what also happened is America rejected the idea of staying in the Bank of International Settlements because it was against our sovereignty and our independence. So who took the place? Oh, right. The Rockefeller Chase Bank took the seat with the Bank of New York and Bank of Chicago until the time came when the Federal Reserve actually took that seat, because they no longer cared what the American people thought at that point. And since then, and here's the kicker, the same people also gave the second chance at a world government from the League of Nations, which was explicitly a world government above nations. The United Nations now comes around in this same time. And guess what they get? They get covered by the International Organization Immunity Act of 1945. You cannot audit them. You cannot investigate them. You cannot take legal action against them, even on U.S. soil. And not just them, but 76 organizations connected to them, including some of the NGOs. At that same time, they are pushing the Rockefeller Brothers funds, the Ford Foundation, and the Carnegie Institute are all on that realm for whatever reason. in some way. So we have all these groups above us that literally have no oversight. No, they answer to no one, no president,
right.
no
No
king, no
accountability.
anyone else. And worse than that, after the 2008 crash, and I want people to really fully understand this, Ben Bernanke, who's on the board of Bank of International Settlements, as has Powell and Yellen and all these people since the controlled demolition of 2008, in 2009, Bernanke admitted that he sent $500 billion of U.S. taxpayer money to these central banks, which of course is likely the Bank of International Settlement, to bail them out. Why would the U.S. taxpayers do such a thing? And then he said he didn't know what banks it went to. And so we have to start being very honest that everything that has happened, I believe, since the Dulles brothers went in was an operation to expand and grow the power, influence, and global governance of a supranational architecture that was created to outlive us all.
That's right.
To outlive us all. So we've had 6 presidents, including Donald Trump, that have been in office underneath this ridiculous, any president could end it, International Organization Immunity Act that has been bleeding us dry, that has gotten away with the entire climate change hoax. Trillions of taxpayer dollars have gone into that. And really, that whole thing was about, in my opinion, World War III was planned before the end of World War II. When they knew that they were going to lose, they had a meeting, the Dulles brothers, a whole bunch of people, but a lot of these international people that go on to end up being known names from, most of this is attached to the CIA, but certainly like Kissinger and all these people that, Klaus Schwab is a product of the CIA because Kissinger was running a CIA operation essentially at Harvard, which is essentially a CIA operation anyway. And he recruited Klaus Schwab during the time that the United States taxpayers also paid for the fraudulent Marshall Fund to rebuild the entire Europe and create the EU and eventually the Euro and eventually the World Economic Forum, because I believe they were trying for third time to do what the Third Reich wanted, which was to destroy Russia, disperse all of its natural resources to the rest of Europe, and run the world through Brussels and Geneva, with the United States being used as the funding mechanism and the military might, and the City of London to be used as the banking mechanism. And I think that's where we still are.
I think we are too, but I would add in some other features to that, and I'm not sure if you've been tracking on this. For some reason, most Americans are just unaware of it. I think because they're not outside the U.S. But are you familiar with the Organization for Economic and Cooperative Development, also born out of World War II? So, what people don't understand about this, and it follows exactly what you're saying, is this is the one world regulator.
Yeah.
And I live in one of those countries. It's an OECD member. They took over on January 1, 2016, 183 nations, tax and fiscal policy. They installed what are called competent authorities over the prime ministers and presidents of these countries. You talk about neuro-linguistic programming, right? In what way are they competent? Well, because that's what they're labeled. It's absolutely absurd. The point is that the illusion of choice, as I call it, because that's governance today, right? People show up and they vote and they think their vote actually counts. When in reality, both sides of the equation, both candidates and their dual party systems, in fact, all the candidates are effectively owned in advance of any election. And the OECD plays such a critical role because at the end of the day, as you talk about banking, they've tracked every dollar, cent, ruble, yen, everything of any value whatsoever back to every living, breathing, natural person since 2016 or even before. But people don't have a concept of this in the United States. They're unfamiliar with this this entity that also enjoys the very things you're talking about. Along with the WHO, they are immune. They're not accountable.
Yeah.
There is no way to hold them accountable other than, as you described, is it in the power of President Trump to say, no, we are undoing this? And frankly, is that what he's doing? Is he subverting their system so much from a macro point of view that it's unraveling and we're able to see it? Those of us who didn't go to Liberty Bell at age 6, is it because we're able to actually see this for ourselves?
No, I think, well, they dumbed down our kids intentionally since probably the 40s when the Rockefellers took over education and recreated everything. I also think they dumbed down their own kids, and that a lot of the people that were involved in the creation of the global pandemic are not the Kissinger and Brzezinski critical thinkers of the past that could do it without. Also, that we are in a very narcissistic, malignant, narcissistic society. They could not help themselves but show themselves to be totally aligned around finance, health, banking, and governance on a different level that the people of the nations that believed they were free could not see it. I really believe that their biggest mistake, and here's why I think they made it. This is might be a stretch, but you can read my book and then decide.
Yeah.
I think that here's the truth. I think that when they had their meeting before Hitler lost, there was a meeting called the Red House meeting. I have the documents. It's a CIAD class. It's a real document. The Hitler's inner circle, including, and I just want to make very clear, what was going on in Switzerland was that the Nazis were working with the Dulles brothers. The Reich Bank had a seat at the table. The head of the Reich Bank was essentially best friends with the head of the Bank of England during the entire World War II.
Yes.
Having dinner together, working
That's
at the
right.
Bank of International Settlements, creating this along with a lot of executives from IG Farben and from IBM and from all these multinational corporations were involved. All the ones that were rebuilding, US Steel and their steel company. And the Rockefellers have a lot to do with this because of their relationship with IG Farben. But the bottom line is that the people that took over our State Department, I believe, were aligned with the Nazis. So again, we have to redefine what are the Nazis. They are a totalitarian regime that believes in no dissent. I mean, above and beyond everything else, totalitarian. And that is explained the best in 1984, which is they don't have an allegiance or alliance to any person, any race, any religion, any flag, anything. It is power for power's sake and an idea that they are above the rest of the world. They are eugenicists at heart, but the eugenicist stuff, eugenics started at the Rockefeller Institute. So a lot of this you have to put together and take a step back. The Rockefellers essentially whitewashed the entire World War II period I'm talking about because they were deeply involved. But what I really want people to understand is that by the end of the war, okay, before Hitler surrendered, they had already figured out how to transfer billions and billions and billions of dollars out of Nazi Germany before Hitler surrendered. And they did a lot of that at Bretton Woods in New Hampshire before D-Day. So when you look at the whole war, what came out of World War II? While America's celebrating, we have the GI Bill. People are going, they're building suburbs. We're growing. People are going to college that never would have gone before. I mean, we're in a post-World War II celebration. These guys are done with America, okay? They have already figured it out. They've planned a post, and then they got all the money out through the Bank of International Settlements, I believe, somehow through the Vatican and Italy area. But a lot of that money went into Argentina because Perón was on the side of the Nazis, as I believe the Dulles brothers were. And when I say Nazis, I don't mean Nazi Germany. I mean a one world government that controls from above everything, So by the time we were supposedly winners of World War II, we lost our sovereignty. And that's really, so we have to go back as American citizens and really figure out how and why this happened and who was involved. And I will tell you how it connects to right now. In that meeting, this Red House meeting, people should look it up. They're talking about, so it's all the bankers from Nazi Germany, including Himmler was there. But now it's the bankers from England. So you'll have all the Rothschild banks, City of London, bankers from Wall Street, lawyers from Wall Street, of course, as the Dulles brothers were, multinational corporation CEOs. Okay. Sounds a little like Event 201. And
it does.
And and what they decided was that they would get the money out of Nazi Germany, get it offshore into subsidiaries of the companies that built the Nazi war machine in Germany, in America. and start building up subsidiaries of their companies in America and around the world in safe havens, because we were still supposedly neutral at the time. And so essentially they were saying that they would plan and try again, kind of like what you think about when you think about the Revolutionary War and the Crown later. And here's the problem. I think that they planned World War III on the continent of Europe using Ukraine by the end of World War II.
Wow.
A lot of people don't know that Ukraine was also the headquarters of the SS, the worst of the worst. But
That's right.
Alan Dulles made sure that none of the Ukraine Nazis were held accountable at Nuremberg. And
Wow.
I firmly believe that it proves it. And the other thing is that now with COVID, just because I know you talk about that a lot, IG Farben and Rockefeller Oil, the relationship was intertwined from before World War I. We essentially paid, or the Rockefellers and Wall Street essentially funded the rebirth of Nazi Germany's war machine. But what we also have to remember is IG Farben had a plant at Auschwitz where they worked 100,000
That's
people
right.
to death, creating Zyklon B, which killed them. But that was a deal with patents and everything with Standard Oil. And then so remember, 10 executives from IG Farben went to Nuremberg and were found guilty. Alan Dulles and his partner in reconstructing Germany, John McCloy, went over there and got all those people out. Okay, so none of those industrialists that were charged stayed in jail for more than a year or two max, and they weren't really in jail. But we have to remember, the military-industrial complex and the pharmaceutical-industrial complex have always been one and the same. They are not two different things. So when COVID came, yeah, they broke up IG Farben into like Bayer and BASF. No. This is still one foot in Germany and the EU now, and one foot in America. And they never accepted it. So then you look at Bilderberg came during those years, the Council of Foreign Relations and Chatham House, the Trilateral Commission, all of these groups, the World Economic Forum, they live off the premise that there is no separation between the United States and Europe at all. Because in their architecture that they work in that we don't know about, there isn't.
Right.
So again, like, we're not dealing with the reality of what happened in America and what was given away in our name and in our dollars and in our system. And so here's what I believe. I know Soros was there. I know Clinton was involved in it. Both Bushes, Clinton, Obama, all these people, I believe, were CIA, kind of on the outskirts, groomed. Whether they were groomed for the State Department or whatever. I think of the CIA and the international intelligence apparatus as working for the international bank, military industrial complex, and that's it. So if you think about that as kind of above our nation all these years, what happened was I think that they planned early, and I'm talking about during Obama's years, particularly what was going on in Ukraine. They were doing a lot of regime change, because don't forget, what's his name? Gorbachev and Reagan at the fall of the USSR with James Baker made a promise. NATO was created to protect Europe from Russia. Okay. Well, now, from the USSR, not Russia, USSR. So when the USSR fell, part of the deal was that they would stop expanding NATO, and Russia would be its own country, and all those other countries would gain their freedom and figure out going forward. Well, this is in the 90s that all of a sudden we're like bombing Yugoslavia remember, it stopped.
Sure.
Under Bill Clinton. Well, what happened? George Soros in 1991, and remember, he's a member of the international banking cartel and has always been. He collapsed the Bank of England, not alone.
Yes, he did.
I mean,
well, some would say that Scott Bessent was part of that.
I know he was. And in 2008, again, controlled demolition, and then we bailed out the whole world with a half $1 trillion of U.S. taxpayer money, and nobody went to jail. So you look at all these things, but here's the thing: George Soros wrote a document in 1993 called the NATO World Order, And a few years later, equally, I believe, responsible for the demise of America, Zig Brzezinski at the Council of Foreign Relations also wrote. And this was about NATO. And it was around the same time of the thinking of the Project for a New American Century, of militarizing the world, the United States being essentially the world military. A lot of this has much more to do with money than military, but they had set up the situation. So Soros is very close with the Clintons. Before Bill Clinton becomes president, he comes in, he's kind of an advisor to them. He's an advisor. Hillary Clinton said it right when Clinton won, she introduced George Soros as the man we need. You know, he already has open societies all over Europe. He's overthrowing countries. He's doing the whole national endowment. Well, people don't know in 91, he signed a deal with USAID. So Soros was working in tandem with USAID the entire time. And what happened was, and it's such a betrayal, Bill Clinton bombed Yugoslavia, okay? And there really was no reason to, other than George Soros wanting to overthrow the regime there on the way towards building the united Europe without Russia. And what happened there? We accidentally hit the Chinese embassy in Yugoslavia. And you know what Bill Clinton gives them? Entrance into the World Trade Organization in exchange. Well, that was long planned by Rockefeller and Kissinger. So if you see all that, so what happened, I think, in 2016, they believed Hillary Clinton was going to win until the minute they called the race for Donald Trump.
Yes.
And I think from that point on, all hell broke loose because they had to go cover up what they had been doing since George H.W. Bush walked on the floor of the United Nations and told us we had a new world order run by the United Nations. Now they're like, Donald Trump cannot know that what we've been doing in regime change operations and subversion of elections and all of this stuff they've been doing straight through Bush Sr. until Trump. And in my opinion, Trump got in the way. The CIA, particularly the people that are in this group, steadystate.org, write a frantic letter to General Flynn. This is the CIA that was based in Europe, that was doing the regime change with the USAID and National Endowment for Democracy in tandem with Open Society. And then NATO and our troops are going into countries for no reason, in my opinion, other than to try to get to this fourth Reich, this next try. And I believe that next try was planned to be under Hillary Clinton's presidency, a full-blown war on the continent of Europe that would end in a reconstruction pull again, and that the solution was going to be Agenda 2030.
Right.
And if you look at the timeline of when Obama signed the United States onto Agenda 2030 in 2015 with Samantha Power and Susan Rice and Blinken and, Cass Sunstein and all his friends, they signed the United States onto a nation-state-ending plan for a global totalitarian technocratic control model that was the Third Reich on steroids, essentially.
For sure. Stasi dream come true. Or Stasi wet dream, as the case may be.
Yeah. And so what happened? Well, they had to stop Donald Trump by any means necessary. He is not going to get in the way. And this guy, Steve Cash, who runs the CIA Spooks NGO that is now, somehow working on U.S. soil, all of these CIA operatives that ran the operations in Europe towards the Third World War, I believe they wrote a letter to General Flynn before Trump even went into office, telling him that they felt that Trump was an existential threat to the world, that he wouldn't follow universal norms, that they had plans for foreign policy that were above his pay grade, essentially. And General Flynn ignored it. Then the guy left and he goes, then General Flynn was gone, laughing. Then he said he sent it to McChrystal and he was ignored. So then they really had to figure out what to do. And then came, of course, Russiagate. So what we've been dealing with, I think, is not about Donald Trump. And people have to understand that. It is about that they decided the future of the world and that nobody was going to get in the way. And that
he got in the way.
Yeah. And we got in the way because we are the ones that overthrew the voting technology that was supposed to make sure that Hillary won. I mean, there are emails that have come out of what's his name, Comey, literally saying basically that they're going to cover up Hillary Clinton's crimes, and I'm sure that she'll be grateful when she's president. Or Adam Schiff saying, well, when she's president, I hope she puts me in the CIA. Imagine that. And my thing is, how many people in our government and in our media and in Hollywood actually are CIA?
All
Because
of
at
them.
this point, that's the war.
All of them.
That's the war the American people are fighting. And what's so great, my book's about to come out to explain it. And then this guy, a CIA guy who had a fake resume, is found having $40 million of gold bars in his house in Virginia. And I'm saying, well, where's the rest of them? You know, go prove to me that people like Norm Eisen and Nicole Wallace and Maddow and all these players that helped create Russiagate aren't actually trained CIA operatives that are working for the international banks and not us, including those lawyers of lawfare. So to me, that's where we are, and that's the enemy. And the American people don't know it because they've never been told the truth about our history after World War II.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But I would argue that I don't think Americans actually had a real view as to the real history from the inception of our nation. One of the things that you touched on, not exactly, but I think it goes to the point of World War II, where you're talking about collaboration between elements of our government or even private citizens that were extraordinarily powerful, and the German interests, Nazi interests, the Department of Energy, right? So as our Department of Energy creates the nuclear weapon, as does the Germans. And now we find out the Japanese were also more or less on par. Everybody was moving forward with nuclear weapons at the same time. And the reality is this: that could have only happened as a function of central planning, because they all had the same technology at the same time. So in other words, who was overseeing all of the governments? And the point that I often make is simply this: if you're the Bank of International Settlements, which effectively owns or controls all the central banks on the planet, save three, right? Then and you print money out of thin air, what could you not buy? And the answer to the question is they can buy anything and everything, and they have, including governments, militaries. They own it all.
Yes.
Because they are the creator of the medium of exchange that we all use. Doesn't matter if it's rubles or yen or dollars, it's irrelevant. What is relevant is they control the medium of exchange. And so I'm kind of curious, you know, when you look at the Department of Energy juxtaposed to the intelligence agencies, and you find that the DOE actually has higher classifications than even the intelligence agencies, doesn't it concern you that what this really at the end of the day is all about is controlling energy itself, life itself?
Yes, 1,000%. And don't forget, Operation Paperclip is in my book, which is the 1,800 scientists that they took. So, now, this is Alan Dulles. What people have to understand, three things about Alan Dulles, who created, and people think it was Wild Bill Donovan. No. It was Dulles manipulating everything when they came back in 1953. He was already in on it. The whole idea of the supranational power. And don't forget, both Dulleses went on. One went to the Council of Foreign Relations. One went to the Ford Foundation. The other one went to the World Bank. Like all these guys that were involved in the creation of the Bank of International Settlements and the International Organization Immunity Act and all of this stuff, they continued on in the same subversive NGOs that are manipulating the world today. And that was a model that came out of that time too, out of the Rockefeller philanthropy model. But when you go back and you look at, I'm sorry, what was it? What am I answering here?
I was curious about the interplay between the power of the Department of Energy as it relates to the global governance.
This is important. So the Department of Energy, I believe, is essentially the continuation of a Nazi project. Just like I believe that a lot of what happened. So what we have to know is that 1,800 Nazis were taken under the guise, and this is by McCloy and Dulles, under the guise of, well, Russia. Suddenly Russia's our enemy when they were our ally, if you recall.
Yeah,
so
they were.
Again,
World War II.
Right. They had to continue the war for profit model above nations. So I think that's what happened there. But the Department of Energy essentially was made up of the best Nazi scientists that existed. Many of them were sentenced in Nuremberg, and McCloy And Dulles went in there and got them out, brought them to America, gave them new names, new passports, brought their whole family, and of course their whole ideology of totalitarianism, Nazism, and eugenics, and put them in the Jet Propulsion Lab, put them in NASA, put them in all of our military strongholds. Likely the precursor to DARPA is really a Nazi project. Now,
Yes.
the other part that most people don't know is that it didn't stop there. Operation Paperclip was the tip of the iceberg. Alan Dulles was very good friends with the head of Hitler's intelligence, who was a man named Galen. Well, then he goes in and gets Galen, Alan Dulles, and puts him in charge of West Germany intelligence and pulls the Galen organization under the CIA. So again, then the other part of that is now we find out Chuck Grassley and Milei. So a lot went through Argentina because Perón was aligned with the Nazis and the bankers. So what right after Milei won, a lot of people don't know this, and it's happening right now. Chuck Grassley sends a letter to Milei saying basically, I don't think we ever figured out the Nazi rat lines or where all that money went, which is what I'm talking about when I talk about the Red House meeting and getting the money out. Chuck Grassley said, I believe that there's documents in Argentina that have been classified for all these years, because I think essentially a lot more Nazis were transferred out of Germany into America, along with a lot of money. Well, Credit Suisse obviously has been under investigation for decades, but they reopened the investigation after Grassley contacted them and Milei, because Milei turned over 100,000 documents.
Wow.
This is since Trump got into office.
Wow.
So Milei turned over 100,000 documents they didn't have before, and now it's looking like actually about 18,000 of the highest level Nazis found their way into the United States of America. And here's the craziest part. Many of them came in and then, got new identities and everything, but then started their own NGOs. And many of them went into academia and started they did not have sociology or behavioral science or any of this stuff in universities in America until that time. So a lot of the theories behind this is that academia, you remember the Weather Underground and all that.
Sure, of course.
And all the Bolsheviks that went to Hollywood. So the idea of this exposure of the actual amount of totalitarian, eugenics believing Nazi sympathizers that were moved to America is way higher, and that they were put into our institutions on purpose.
Yes.
And if you look at that and you look at the relationship between Rockefeller, IG Farben, the Dulles brothers, and Himmler, and all of the international banks, and this protection racket above nations that still exists, then flat out who really won World War II.
I was going to ask you that. You volunteered it. Who really won? So that's why you make mention of the Fourth Reich. This is such a fabulous history lesson, the true history lesson. Mel,
and how dare they? How dare they steal our country? And what's so scary? This is what Trump used to say, they're not after me, they're after you, and I'm in the way. And I would say to him and everyone else, no. They're not after America. They're after the world. And America is in the way.
Yeah,
Our
that's right.
Our Bill of Rights, our borders, language, culture, our independence that we never even got to have, our everything else. We have been lied to, looted, and betrayed from within for decades and decades. And all 5 presidents other than Donald Trump were in on it. And
That's exactly
I believe
right.
And don't forget, when everyone started creating their own global, Clinton Global Initiative, the Open Society, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, go dig back in, and you're going to see this is all the same families from the Federal Reserve. They all have pushed it out there, but a lot of these NGOs that came out of that time, post 40s, are really, I believe, the ideological NGOs of the Nazis that we saved and brought here. And the history of Nuremberg is a lie.
Yes, it is.
Nobody was held accountable. And frankly, they kept Ukraine for the third try, and that is what we are dealing with now. That is what they didn't want people to know. I firmly believe everything that happened to Donald Trump was a global intelligence overthrow of a duly elected president in the United States of America to keep power for the architecture post World War II, and that is exactly who I believe he's fighting. So when you look at Israel and the Jews, let me be very clear. Israel existence has nothing to do, in my opinion, with what happened after 1947 and Israel being a piece of this same supranational architecture, particularly in the intelligence realm. So, I mean, to point at any one thing is to not understand what we're dealing with.
Absolutely. It's just another means of division. Right, to
Yes.
keep us divided, and it's all anti-human at the end of the day. And I think you've got it exactly right. It's infiltration instead of invasion. They didn't need to invade because they just took over governance, and our stupidity and abdication and apathy allowed it to happen. My God, what a fabulous book. I can't wait to read through this. We're out of time. So tell people, how do they get your book? How do they find you? How do they follow you? Because you also have a very popular podcast. I want to make sure people are tracking on this because, no, the only way out of this is knowledge, is people knowing this.
I know. That's why I wrote it, because I kept saying, Todd, I know, you know, we've had full conversations about reality. The problem is that the American people are not empowered with the truth. And if they were, they would realize all of us. There is no a group that's been more betrayed than another group. Every person that has paid taxes since 1944 has been betrayed by this supranational group that overtook our country like a parasite. And so I just like everything. When you look back at like the opera, and I think the CIA, all roads lead to Langley, in my opinion, and the Dulles brothers. And never forget that they're lawyers, the lawyers of Wall Street. But I do want to say, I have a daily news show, and I used to do full interviews, like which I love, like this, with like the Joe Rogan types or your types. But I felt like I knew so much because of my work about what is coming out in D class, about January 6th, about Transition Integrity Project, West Executive Advisors, all these things American people don't know, and I believe will be coming out. They should have, a lot of them come out already. So I'm doing a daily news show now at 12 to 1:30 p.m. Eastern on Rumble and X Live. I still do interviews. The book can be found anywhere books are sold. It's on pre-sale, but the best place to go is to themelkshow.com and check it out there. And then also I have a free resource page. We're going to put up all the documents from the book. Everything I have is documented. This is extensive bibliography. And I want this is the point, Todd, and I know this is why you do what you do. The American people deserve to know everything that happened, no matter how ugly. My first book, Americans Anonymous, was a recovery book for American citizens that feel helpless. And I will tell you, we are not helpless. We are just in the dark. We have been deceived at the highest level. And if we can just realize that the crack epidemic in the inner cities and, what's been going on with DEI and what's gone on with, other things that have happened over the years, let alone the murder of JFK, the president of the United States, and then the people involved being on the commission. And then they also get to say what happened. And then we're supposed to move on, has been a model since 1963. The criminals commit the crimes, then cover up the crimes, then give us the solution, and we're supposed to move on. We can't move on this time. We need to deal with it. And like I said, our country's as sick as its secrets. And it's time for the American people to be empowered by the truth and to realize what we have here is unique and special. And that's why they've been trying to destroy it all this time. And we better realize that and stand up, because it's not just us that will lose. It's the entire world. They are not they are not after America. They are after the world. And it is our DNA, our Constitution, and our Bill of Rights that are standing between total technocratic, totalitarian track and trace surveillance at the highest level and freedom.
Boy, I couldn't have said it better. It's the eradication of humanity as it is. So you got to come back, because there's so much more to talk about.
It's Todd was like, it's Todd Callender. I'm like, I haven't seen Todd Callender. Where is he?
So-
But it's just, I've been writing this book for 2 years. So now I'm free to travel.
Well, let's do that because I've got more questions
Cool.
for you. Some
Great.
of which I think will be really fun, and I so
Great.
appreciate your brilliance, your brain. It's
Thank you.
a joy to have you here, Mel. And so, okay, we'll put into the show notes. People can follow you. Make sure that
Cool.
we're driving. And by the way, just for people to know, I looked at your book pre-sale on Simon and Schuster, and they give a really nice review. So I think
Great.
that's a nice place to do it. So we'll get behind it, support your book. And by the way, put it on the marketplace so people can buy it right here. So God bless you.
I have to find out what you're doing. We lost touch. We were all trying to save the world, and everyone had to do what they had to do. But
Yeah.
I'll be in touch soon. And thank you so much, Todd. You're a real patriot.
No, it's my honor, Mel. God bless you. Thanks for being here, and thanks for going to the trouble of writing the book.
Oh, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I'll
You
see you
bet.
next time.